Hello, everybody. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government. And, there's a few things going on today that I wanted you all to be aware of. And I might not have gotten the full story on some of this stuff. First and foremost, it's about the special counsel who's been picked by Attorney General Merrick Garland to investigate January 6th, Donald Trump and the declassification of documents. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit, both from a practical, who is this guy, just Jack Smith guy? It's pretty generic name, and most people have no idea. And I know I didn't remember who he was until, I tried to do a little research. And there's a couple of things that are notable, given the fact that we've seen how creative some special counsels can be in terms of trying to come to find ways to convict people, trick them into lying or obstruction of justice when in fact they did neither, and then drive them into bankruptcy as the special counsel just continues to pile on attorney costs after attorney costs. Meanwhile, the person loses their job, has no means of support, and as a result, they go off and they plead guilty to something they weren't guilty of just to make it go away. Well, we've seen that happen. We saw it happen with General Flynn. We've seen it happen repeatedly over time. And so special counsel has got a tremendous amount of power. They are basically an extra judicial official who can do virtually anything, regardless of whether the explicit instructions of what the scope of their power is narrow or broad. It doesn't, they tend to be able to wander off wherever their investigation takes them. And if the investigation is intent on finding guilt, no matter how many instances no matter how much evidence of innocence exists, then it becomes a problem. So let's just talk about Jack Smith here. First of all, Jack Smith is an interesting guy in that he's not a person unknown. He was in fact the guy who was doing. Where am I doing? Okay, sorry. He's been appointed to be. He has been the war crimes prosecutor in The Hague, meaning he's been prosecuting people from the Kosovo War 20 years ago on war crimes at The Hague. So, I guess dredging up old crimes and prosecuting them as a qualifier. In his announcement, we know that he has been at the Department of Justice. He was the head of the Department of Public Integrity. So there's two things that he did there at Department of Justice that I think are informative. In 2010, the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee discovered, actually in 2014, they discovered that the Department of Justice had engaged in working with the Internal Revenue Service, the Lois Lerner, to investigate and try to prosecute and go after people who were just trying to basically engage in political activity by signing up to become a 501c4 nonprofit in the wake of a Citizens United decision. And all that's a lot of words that may not have meaning, but the key thing is Jack Smith is the guy who in 2010 went to the IRS and said, let's figure out how to prosecute people. They're trying to get around the law, when in fact the Supreme Court had changed the law and had made it so you could C4s could in fact engage in political activity, and overt political activity. Up to 50% of their revenues could do that. That's the law of the land. The Supreme Court did that. Jack Smith, though, wanted to use the power of the IRS, who was approving these 501c4 applications, and the power of the Department of Justice to prosecute people. He also inquired about whether or not they could get at the people who were contributors to 501c4s, so they could prosecute them for violating whatever law he purports to thought they violated. And so he was aggressive in terms of trying to overturn the Supreme Court decision based on ignoring it and prosecuting those who were following it. That's what Jack Smith did in 2010. And they didn't find out at the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee until 2014 that occurred. And I'm going to just read you a little section here of a letter that the Committee on Oversight, House Oversight and Government Reform Committee sent to then Attorney General Eric Holder. This was on May 6, 2014. Actually, it was on May 22, 2014. They found out this information on May 6, 2014. Okay. While we knew that the Justice Department engaged with the IRS in May of 2013 to consider prosecution of politically active nonprofits, we were shocked to learn that this engagement started in October 2010. According to Mr. Pilger, the Justice Department, Pilger is the one who testified before the committee. He was a subordinate to Jack Smith. The Justice Department convened a meeting with former IRS official Lois Lerner in October 2010 to discuss how the IRS could assist in the criminal enforcement of campaign finance laws against politically active nonprofits. It was legal. Remember, it was legal for those nonprofits to be politically active. That was legal. And so let's just be clear. This meeting was arranged at the direction of Public Integrity Section Chief Jack Smith. We therefore respectfully request that you make Mr. Smith available for a transcribed interview. Didn't happen. According to Mr. Pilger, Mr. Smith asked him to arrange a meeting in early October 2010 with the IRS about the quote unquote evolving legal landscape, unquote, of campaign finance law following the Supreme Court Citizens United and Federal Election Commission decision. Mr. Pilger testified that the department's agenda for the meeting was to engage with Ms. Lerner and the IRS on being more vigilant to the opportunities for more crime in the 501c4 area. And Mr. Pilger testified that he was interested in the practicalities of legal criminal enforcement by the IRS, such as whether the IRS could review donor lists of 501c4 organizations for potential violations of campaign finance law. Pilger stated that Ms. Lerner, however, expressed skepticism about the practicality of using criminal law to address political speech by 501c4 organizations. Okay, so here's what we learned. Lois Lerner, the person who we all castigated as being the real bad guy here, and she was, actually is the person who told the Department of Justice, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to criminally prosecute. We're not going to have criminal prosecutions of people based on FEC law. We're not going to do that. She's the one who told them no. If she'd been more pliant, you would have had Eric Holder's Justice Department going in federal criminal prosecutions against people who engage in legal activity, and also would have had the donors who, at that time, it was required that the 501c4, like Americans for Limited Government, provide a list of donors to the IRS, but those donors were not released to the public. They were shielded based upon a decision called Alabama v. NAACP, because those donors were any donor for a C4. They didn't want to have potential intimidation waged against those donors. Right here, Jack Smith, the guy who's supposed to be the special counsel, has been appointed to be special counsel, wanted to engage in that exact intimidation against donors, the exact intimidation that the Supreme Court found, I think it was in 1956, that they would not allow when the state of Alabama attempted to get the membership rolls, the donor rolls, of the NAACP of Alabama. And the NAACP of Alabama said, no, you're not going to get it. Why did the state of Alabama want it? They wanted to go after the donors because they were supporting the NAACP and the civil rights movement. The state of Alabama wanted to go after the donors and harass them, prosecute them, whatever. The Supreme Court said, nope, you don't get to do that. These donations are not going to be released. They are not public information, and you cannot go after them because political speech is protected. Now, so Jack Smith doesn't believe in political speech. Let's just be clear. He doesn't believe in political speech because otherwise he would not have in 2010 immediately turned to we must prosecute anybody who's attempting to engage in political speech on the right. That's what he did. That's what the committee writes right here. This letter was signed by 17 members of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee in 2014. And of course, Eric Holder stonewalled them and never made that happen. So that's who Jack Smith is. Jack Smith also is the guy who prosecuted Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell on a variety of charges that basically amounted to their public corruption charges. The challenge was, and he convicted him, and Bob McDonnell resigned from office. But the charges themselves were based on a broad interpretation of what influence was. And that if you sat there and you had a meeting with somebody who'd given you money, you were effectively potentially guilty of engaging in political influence peddling. Well, that's just not true. Imagine a world where the only people you could give money or you could meet with as a politician were people who didn't give you money and people who didn't give you, who voted against you. What kind of world is that? It's basically it goes against the very grain of politics. That's not corruption, having a meeting. It's not, and so consequently, but Jack Smith expanded the definition of what corruption was to fit the charge against McDonnell. The Supreme Court, remember the Supreme Court back then was in 2014, was had 4 members who were Democrat appointed. And actually it was eight at the time. So it was 5 and 3, I think. So 3 members who were Democratic appointed, including icon of the left, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They decided unanimously that Jack Smith had violated, had overextended what corruption was, and had set up a corruption standard that would allow any politician anywhere to be indicted and prosecuted on anything, making it impossible for them to even have meetings with people, because after all, if you have a meeting, there's a potential for corruption. So Jack Smith took total disregard for any kind of semblance of reality in terms of how you actually can engage in political business. And this is not talking about accepting bribes. This is talking about a guy who decided he was going to expand the written definition, the clear law on what constituted a quid pro quo. Remember that term. And by expanding that definition, he expanded it so we could go after a Republican governor of Virginia on corruption charges. So this is the guy who we're supposed to say is going to conduct a fair and honest investigation, a guy who wanted to prosecute 501c4s, basically people out there who were like, Becky Garrettson from the state of Alabama, who sits at the Wetumpka Tea Party and wants to be able to engage in political activity and get people's voices heard in her local community. No, she gets investigated by the IRS. Well, he got investigated by the IRS. She got harassed by the IRS, but this guy, Jack Smith, wanted to throw her in jail for that. That's who Jack Smith is. Can we trust him as a special counsel? Can we trust a guy who expanded the very definition of what corruption was, so broadly that even the Democrats said, you've gone too far, in a unanimous decision to throw out a conviction that he gained using a definition that was that gave the term tortured logic, made it seem like it was rational. So Jack, this is the guy. I'm sorry, folks. Let me just give you a couple things. I'm going to now just reel off 4 things. If Jack Smith wants to prosecute, well, here you go. Here's Exhibit A. On the charge that the exhibits that Donald Trump had material or classified material at Mar-a-Lago on January 19th, 2021. That's when Donald Trump was president. There was a memorandum to the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of Central Intelligence Agency, subject by the President, Trump. Subject, declassification of certain materials related to the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation, where President Trump, as President of the United States, power vested in the Constitution, declassified a whole series of materials. Okay, a whole series of materials. Just to read the first one, declassification release. At my request on December 30, 2020, the Department of Justice provided the White House with a binder of materials related to the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Portions of the documents in the binder have remained classified and have not been released to the public, Congress, or public. I requested documents so that a declassification review could be performed, and so I could determine to what extent materials in the binder should be released in unclassified form. I determined that the materials in that binder should be declassified to the maximum extent possible in response and as part of the iterative process of the declassification review under a cover letter dated January 17th. The Federal Bureau of Investigation notes the continuing objection to any further declassification, and so they objected. And I've determined to accept the redactions proposed for continued declassification by the FBI in that submission. Okay, I hereby declassify the remaining materials in the binders. This is my final determination. So Donald Trump declassified the documents. Okay, so Mr. Smith, on the first part of this investigation, the documents were declassified and legally declassified. Nothing to see here. Donald Trump, innocent. Don't even have to open your office, my friend. Just look up one freaking document. Okay, let's look at another document. Okay, this is Donald Trump. He's saying at the rally. Okay, at the rally, we have come to demand. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. Lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. This is Donald Trump speaking to the audience, peacefully and patriotically making your voices heard. So did Donald Trump incite the riot? No. Right there. That's at 1860. That's 1860 in its speech. So you've got a dead set, can't slam dunk Donald Trump's voice peacefully and patriotically. And I would argue that by saying patriotically, he's saying very clearly, not with violence. Patriotically is not hanging from the rafters of the Capitol building. Okay, so there you go. His own words. I know everybody's heard that, but let's just be clear. That's what Donald Trump said. Now, just for a little review, let's just look at maybe something about, speech. And, Donald Trump has a right to free speech as a president and as a private citizen. But let's just look at speech. So even if you looked at the totality of what he said in the speech, you then have this little problem, Mr. Smith. Here's the First Amendment. Okay, something that would be really nice if some of these guys reviewed. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So when Donald Trump said peacefully assemble, that's in the First freaking Amendment of the Constitution. Those people had a right to do that. They didn't have a right to break into the Capitol. They didn't have a right to do that, but they did have a right to peaceably assemble, which is what he said to do. First Amendment, exculpatory. So now if you wanted just a fourth piece, today it's kind of interesting. I'm gonna bring this up so you guys can see it. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. Donald Trump's Twitter account was reinstated. How about that? And because of that, his last tweets are the last ones that show. And guess what his last tweets are? His last tweet was, I am asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. What do you want? What do you want? It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. By the way, the other thing I'll just point out this one. This was Donald Trump pointing out this was the Capitol in June. Please save me your outrage. Now this is the fires that are going on of things being set on fire. This is around the White House. That is the White House complex right there. obviously Washington Monument, just south of the White House, Jefferson Memorial there. And having been at the White House when Donald Trump accepted the nomination for the Republican nomination for president, I was in the crowd. I was in the crowd that had throngs of Antifa people surrounding the White House, shouting and screaming and trying to intimidate. I was amongst the people who were trying to get out of the White House without getting killed on a 1.5 block walk to my car, who had to get on a bus, get transported over to the Trump Hotel where the Metropolitan Police wouldn't let us leave until 3 a.m. in the morning to walk down the street 3 blocks to get to where my car was and where others were staying at the Willard Hotel. This is the peaceful protest, them setting things on fire and essentially and intimidating people. They attacked Senator Rand Paul in that crowd. Capitol policeman, I'm sorry, it was a Metropolitan policeman, helped escort Rand Paul and his wife to their vehicle. We had a mob intent on doing violence against people, and I had to go through it. Rand Paul had to go through it. And yet there was no congressional hearings on that. So but this was put out, recognized. So this was something that he put up. Let's see what else. I'm sorry, this wasn't one of his tweets. This is what somebody put. This was what somebody else put up. This wasn't what Donald Trump. He sent this to Donald Trump. So Donald Trump was off of his last thing he posted was this. The person who said, "Save me your outrage," posted this at Donald Trump. So exculpatory evidence. The exculpatory evidence is obvious. You got the First Amendment. You got his Twitter account where Donald Trump, peaceful and peaceful, nonviolent law enforcement. We like law enforcement. Okay. No way you could ever interpret that in any way other than we want, don't engage in violent behavior. We have you go and you have the actual statement that he put out, or not the actual statement, what he said at the actual event, and then you have the declassification. The two things that this guy's supposed to investigate are both null and void. The evidence is there. It's just been presented. Jack, if you know Jack, you need to jump off this ship because the exculpatory evidence is there. And this is kind of like Mueller going on and having a 1.5 to 2 year investigation when he knew that the Steele dossier that underlie the investigation was false. So there's nothing here that they're going to be able to do. There's nothing here that's real. This is just another political attack, and I'm sick of it, as you can tell. So let's go on to the next thing. We have one more week for the Tony Toon calendar, Political Cartoons by F. Bronco, the calendar which ALG has prepared. You can get this at algmerch.com. David should be putting up the info somewhere in terms of how to link onto it. And we're not going to be able to guarantee you to get this before Christmas, after Cyber Monday. We've received notification that things may not be able to ship, may not arrive until 3 weeks after the purchase. We don't want to take any chances. We don't want you to feel as though, hey, I ordered this and I didn't get it in time. But that means we have to shut down taking guaranteed orders before Christmas. We have to shut it down after Cyber Monday. So once Cyber Monday is over, which is a week from today, once Cyber Monday is over, we are not going to be able to guarantee that you'll be able to get this calendar before Christmas. And as a reminder, I think David should have put up some stuff. I'm just going to give you a couple. For instance, this is December this year. This is next month's. I'll show you what this one's. This one is, why are my poll numbers shrinking? You're too moderate. AOC hitting it with you're too moderate. That was the Tony Tune we had for November of this year. So we try to make the tunes applicable, and I think you guys will enjoy them. We spent a lot of time picking out the right tune. Every one of these tunes are ones that the Americans for Limited Government paid for, and every bit of profit we make off of this goes to the fight for freedom. So this is a great way to get gifts for your friends and help and give gifts for for anybody you want to. There's also a lot of other merchandise. We got a bundle package on there that's got a T-shirt and some other stuff that you can get. So just go to the algmerch.com, check it out. If you like something, you can go and get it. But go to the whole site, because we've got puzzles, we've got other things that are good gifts that people would like. We've got some artwork, Tony Tune artwork that we've got. So all sorts of different stuff on there that I think people will like. We even have an Americans for Limited Government Christmas ornament on there if you want an ALG Christmas ornament. So lots of great stuff, and spent a lot of time putting this together, and we did it so you guys would have something that I think you would enjoy. And rather than get worked up on all this stuff, but sometimes we just have to remember that humor and is probably the best way of combating those who are abusing power, because they can't stand to be laughed at. And Tony Branco is a brilliant cartoonist who we've been working with for 7 years now. Tony's a brilliant cartoonist. He's the best in the business. And he does stuff exclusively for Americans for Limited Government. So you can buy the calendar and you'll get it, or buy some of the art, you'll own it yourself. So it's a great thing. And once again, all profits off the ALG merch store, all the profits go to the fight for freedom. So it's really appreciated, anything you do in that regard. So check it out. Let's go to the next topic that we wanted to do, because because I think that's it's important. We've been talking about the Department of Justice. Well, first of all, I'm going to get some comments first before I go. All the Democrats are going to do is drive everybody to the poorhouse and create so much homelessness we have an epidemic. Yeah, well, if you see, since they reward homelessness and essentially you're probably in some places they've destroyed our inner cities through homelessness, and this is not against homeless. The fact is, if you actually want to deal with homelessness, there's some thresholds, and we have to get half the homeless suffer from mental illness. And yet, due to an ACLU decision back when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, the states have been required to just turn homeless or mentally ill people on the streets. And so we have people who are mentally ill who are on the streets, and it's a crime that we can't that the government is not allowed to basically take them somewhere to give them treatment, to give them help. I remember when I was a kid, I was in college, and I was walking from my car to an internship I had in the City of Los Angeles government, Parks and Recreation Parks Department. No, not the TV show, but nonetheless, it was sort of like that. So I was an administrative intern, working my way through college, making $6 an hour there. And every day I had to walk through Skid Row. This parking I could afford was on 4th, 5th Street, and I had to walk to 0th Street, 1st Street. And Skid Row was right there. And there was a guy who stood on the street corner every single day. And when you were walking in or you were walking back, he'd just do this all day long. And yet you couldn't bring him in to help him. He was in an alternative world. And it broke my heart. It stuck with me for all these years. It was horrific. You saw human beings who were thrown away on the streets. They were drug addicts. They were people who were mentally ill. There were some who were just down on their luck. And you sit there and you look at it, and they were just thrown away. And it broke my heart. It truly broke my heart. And that's where we've gotten in terms of homelessness. And so Yeah, this isn't a conservative liberal issue. It's an issue of decency. And the fact of the matter is, the when big government took away the feeling that amongst churches that they were responsible for taking care of the least of these, and then completely dropped the ball and said, we're not going to do that. That's how we ended up with so much homelessness, and it's going to continue if we continue on our same course. Yeah, Rick, I had to go back and review how I got on the homeless conversation, but Rick Albert, Dems are obsessed with President Trump. Yeah, unfortunately. Well, they don't have anything good to talk about. They don't have any good stories to tell about great things that big government had done. So consequently, they have to continue to talk to President Trump because that's what, they're trying to boost ratings for MSNBC because that's what the MSNBC readership wants. Yeah, Ricky, they are the new mafia, and and unfortunately, I need to watch out. I'm sitting by a window here. I need to move up a little bit. Unfortunately, it seems that way, where it's comply or die when it comes to, and by comply, do what we say when it comes to the new Department of Justice. Yeah, leave Trump and us alone. That's why not. It makes sense that we should want to do that. And it's all, here's the thing. Donald Trump doesn't need to be president of the United States. Donald Trump's got a pretty darn nice life. And the fact that, knowing what he knows, he's willing to go and run again is pretty admirable, pretty amazing. Haven't endorsed anybody at this juncture, but let's just recognize how amazing it is. Forgot about Hunter Scruggs. Yeah, well, they didn't forget. They buried him. Merrick Garland has repeatedly shown himself as an empty suit. Here's the problem. I don't think he is an empty suit. If he was an empty suit, he wouldn't be dangerous. But the fact is, this guy was chief judge of the D.C. Circuit, of the second most powerful court in the land. He's not an empty suit. He's a very smart guy. And the fact that he can conveniently forget large parts of the law to fit his prosecutorial predilection, it shows you a level of corruption that is scary. And the fact that he's a very smart attorney and very smart federal judge, he's got a pretty good idea of what they can get away with and what they can't get away with. And that is why he's not, we can't just pretend like he's just a guy who's being used. He's a guy who is able and capable, shuffling around in his old man suit, but he knows what he's doing. He's not a person who's being manipulated. So we're going to go off of that now. I had planned on talking about two other subjects, but since we're at about 30 minutes after the start, I'm going to just wrap it up. I wanted to make certain you guys knew who Jack Smith was, why it matters, and why we have to get the word to members of Congress and the Senate and the House that this guy is not the public integrity guru who's a perfect little citizen who hasn't engaged in the most corrupt political activity targeting speech of virtually anyone in the Department of Justice. He's been the point of the spear when it came to trying to prosecute people in the Lois Lerner case. He's been the point of the spear of going after a political official, a Republican political official in particular, and getting a conviction by virtue of completely changing the law as it relates to what corruption is, and had to be slapped down by an 8-0 vote in the Supreme Court, with 3 of those votes coming from Democrats on that court. So this guy is not afraid to expand the language of law and prosecute. And as a result, he is the exact wrong person to be a special counsel. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. I appreciate you guys tuning in. We will be back tomorrow for another edition. And I expect we're going to be talking a little bit about a few other things that have come to the attention. For instance, Merrick Garland's failure to prosecute, FBI's failure to investigate and get indictments against people who are busily bombing and firebombing pro-life pregnancy centers, while they focus their attention on people who blockade, as they call it, abortion clinics. So we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow. We'll talk about a couple of other things that are coming up. And as always, whatever's hot in the news, we'll talk about. With that, I appreciate you tuning in. You guys have a great Monday evening.